Hey everybody, this is your Right Geek and Honorary Man King, here with another edition of Steph's Random Number Generator, in which I compare a modern Iron Man comic to a randomly selected Iron Man comic from the 70s or the 80s, in this case, the 80s. I'm going to start here with Iron Man 2020 number 3, in which we pick up where we left off in the second issue. The robot revolutionaries are trying to prevent Arno Stark from sending out a global signal that will essentially enslave AIs all over the Earth. And this storyline in this issue essentially culminates in a confrontation between Tony, AI Tony, I should say, because he's not the real guy, and Arno Stark. And they have this one-on-one fight. This actually made me laugh, though. The gears apparently turn around. Okay. Whatever. So my whole emotional reaction to this was basically there was no emotional reaction. It was just like, okay, meh, whatever. Kind of like the rest of the issues in this series. I know what this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be this dramatic confrontation between brother and brother. But the emotional resonance just wasn't there. And why is that? Well, first of all, if you know the history of these two characters, Arno Stark and Tony Stark did not grow up together, as is revealed in the really dumbass The Secret Origins of Tony Stark. Arno was hidden away in an iron lung for all of their childhood, so they don't really have this relationship where they've known each other their entire lives. If they had had such a relationship, maybe the fact that they are now in conflict would resonate. But honestly, I felt more emotion reading Civil War and watching Steve Rogers and Tony Stark fight with each other, because they had way more emotional connection to each other. These two characters don't really have much of an emotional connection at all. The other thing is that neither one of these characters is actually sympathetic at this point. Arno is a megalomaniac who wants to take over the world because he believes that some extinction event requires that everyone unite under his leadership. And Tony, as far as I can tell, is a terrorist. We still haven't seen any scene in which Tony berates his fellow robot revolutionaries for their fondness for massive collateral damage. And absent a scene like that, that's the only conclusion I can draw, is that this AI version of Tony has decided that terrorism is okay. So I can't really be in love with this character either. So what does it matter who wins this fight? I don't care about either character. There is one funny thing in this. Oh yeah, by the way, the robots send out a signal that basically activate all the animatronics, so you get like this Disney thing here, coming to fight, which is kind of dumb looking. And then Tony gets brought into Escape here. I'm trying to find this one thing. Trying to find this one panel that made me laugh. Oh yeah. Here's the one. So how could you, Arno? They're your parents, our parents. And then Mom's like, I hate to be a nag, but you should really get a haircut, dear. Agreed, we can't have a Stark man looking like some dirty hippie. That I actually laughed at, because, oh my god, I hate this hairstyle. I hate this hairstyle as much as I hate the wino beard that I'm about to talk about in a second. Yes, please cut your hair. Actually, whether or not he's going to cut his hair is moot because, spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. Spoiler, 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 spoiler. If Comixology can get a shit together. Oh yeah, AI Tony dies at the end. Who cares? Yeah, so... once again, I didn't really feel... I didn't have any emotional reaction to this because, once again, none of the characters are sympathetic to me. And, you know, the relationship struggle that this is supposed to represent just... it doesn't work because they did not have that kind of relationship. Like I said, Steve Rogers and Tony Stark fighting in Civil War had way more emotional resonance than Arno Stark and Tony Stark fighting here. So how does this compare to our randomly selected comic from, in this case, end of 1984, 1985. It's got a February date, so probably it was put out at the end of 1984. This is issue number 191. And the context of this issue, this is almost a year after this one, which I am going to do a video on eventually, because this is one of those issues that destroyed my life. So it's almost a year after Tony finally managed to sober up after he had been a drunk homeless guy for a year and change. Actually, it was a little more than a year, because it was something like 14, 15 issues. And he is not actually Iron Man yet at this point. He is right now in California trying to get this new company started. But he is not yet Iron Man. Rhodey is still Iron Man because trying to find he's been building new armor because, as he says, he's trying to... that's how he works, is he works with his hands, he says. But he still does not believe that he should be Iron Man because he concluded at the end of his year-plus-long bender that Iron Man was one of the ways that he escaped his problems instead of facing what was going on psychologically head-on. So... he's really hesitant to get back into that Iron Man role because he really thinks that if he does again, he'll start drinking again because he'll use that Iron Man persona as an escape instead of actually tackling his flaws head on. So we have here... oh yeah, by the way, I mentioned the hobo beard earlier. I'm so glad when he shaved this off later on, because I wasn't too fond of it while I was reading this. I read all of Volume 1 in a summer, basically, so luckily I didn't have to wait too long, but yes, please shave the hobo beard. Please, please, please. Anyway, so he's thinking, I'm not even sure what I am. He's still uncertain that he should be Iron Man. Let's see. I only know I'm not Iron Man. This I'll never put on. So he's really, really resistant to the idea that he should be Iron Man again. Meanwhile, Rhodey is himself feeling very conflicted and resentful of Tony. I happen to think that this occasionally was overdone, like it was over dramatic or overwritten, but it does kind of make sense that after Tony disappears for more than a year and basically trashes his entire life, disappearing inside the bottle, it makes sense that Rhodey, who had to become Iron Man to basically pick up Tony's pieces, would be feeling resentful and would kind of have trouble trusting Tony again after after all that went on. So at least emotionally, that makes sense. And we have here, he mentions that in recent issues, he's been having these crippling headaches, and his doctors can't figure out why. And he's like, and it isn't the tin suit. Stark eliminated that possibility. But then he's like, or did he? He might have been lying. He probably was. It'd be just like him. So you see this loss of trust that has gone on. That, once again, I think that does make sense, given the recent history, that Rhodey would be looking at Tony a little bit differently. So emotionally, this actually does resonate. There's a lot more feeling in this comic than in the modern comic, because what we have here is we have this basically this angst between these two characters who have been friends for years, but now there's this rift that's between them because of how Tony has trashed his life by disappearing inside the bottle and basically disappearing for a year. So because Rhodey is feeling so angry and so conflicted, when this character, Vibro, who he's able to generate earthquakes, when he escapes from captivity, Rhodey decides that he's going to go off on his own and go after him. And the other characters are like, oh no, we can't let him do that because emotionally he's not quite balanced. And this eventually ends with so we have here Tony says, we've seen how dangerous he is. He's talking about Rhodey, and we have nothing to protect ourselves with, nor any way of attacking him. They're going after Rhodey because they're afraid that Rhodey is going to, in his attempts to attack Vibro, he's going to end up injuring civilians at this air show because he's not balanced and he's not thinking straight. And here we have the character saying, yes, we do. I packed your new armor. It's in the trunk. Well, that's where it stays, because he's still resisting. He's still resisting being Iron Man. Tony, we have an obligation to put that madman where he can do no harm. Morley, Cly, the armor isn't tested. I'm not certain that it functions, but more than that, I'm not Iron Man anymore. So, like, the big emotional drama of this is Tony resisting who he really is, because again, he has this fear that if he becomes Iron Man again, then he will start drinking again, that he will once again try to escape from his problems by donning the Iron Man persona. But this eventually ends with him realizing that so we have here again, that's not true. We can do more. Or you can, Tony. You can put on the new armor and go after Rhodey. Stop him. You've got to. And here he is. No, I told you. So again, we have this severe conflict going on in his mind. But this issue basically resolves with him with him realizing that yes, he does have to become Iron Man again. It's his responsibility. And so he puts on the new armor that he built, and he becomes Iron Man. So this has a solid, recognizable emotional arc. It's one that actually matters given the recent history. And once again, this is not like one of the best comics of the 1980s by any means. But still, even though this was what you would call an average issue, it has way more emotional power than the issue I scrolled through with you first. I really think, like, I'm going to continue with this because I have this personal flaw that once I'm more than halfway through something, I basically feel like I'm committed and I need to go all the way through to the end. I mean, I honestly could dip out at this point, especially since Dan Slott has told me to fuck off. But all the same, I'm a completist, so I am going to keep reading the 2020 event and talking about it here, just for your benefit, if not necessarily for mine. But I honestly think at this point that we need to have like a year-long moratorium or something on Iron Man comics so that people can get their shit together, and maybe we can find a writer who, like me, actually gives a damn about this character. Like, you know, are Layton and Michelini still alive? Bring them back. They were great Iron Man writers. The Iron Man comics today, they're just not working for me, and something needs to happen to shift gears, whether it's a moratorium or whether we just need to change out the writers to maybe some former writers of Iron Man that did a good job with the character. Like, well, I thought Kurt Busiek did pretty good too. Is he still around? Can he write Iron Man, please? Bring some of these old writers back, and maybe we'll see a shift in how Iron Man is written today. Thank you for listening to my double review, and I hope to speak to you again on Thursday.